right, good morning, folks. Welcome to the South Atlantic LCC's Third Thursday Web Forum. This is the November edition. My name's Hillary Morris, and as always, I work on Blueprint user support and communications for your cooperative. Each month, your cooperative hosts a web forum featuring a presentation on current and ongoing work throughout the South Atlantic LCC that takes place every third Thursday of the month at 10 a.m. and serves as a great chance to ask questions and provide feedback to help guide the future of the South Atlantic LCC. So to minimize background noise, I always mute everyone during the presentation. So if you have questions, you can either type them into the chat box and I'll monitor that, or you can hold them until after the presentation. So if you do use the chat box and want everyone to be able to read the question during the open discussion, just remember to send the note to everyone. And to speak at any time, all you'll need to do is press *6 to unmute yourself. So before I mute everyone, does anyone want to speak up with any questions, comments, concerns?
The conference is now in silent mode.
So each forum has the same overall agenda. I'll start out by introducing our presenter, who will speak for about 30 to 40 minutes. And then following the presentation, there's plenty of time for questions. And we'll spend the rest of the webinar on updates from your cooperative, followed by an open discussion. So great, presenting today we have Tom Allen, who's a professor in the Department of Geography, Planning, and Environment at East Carolina University. He and one of his colleagues, as you may remember, J.P. Walsh, spoke with us last September, actually, about their work on detailed mapping of marsh distribution and understanding marsh vulnerability to sea level rise. So Dr. Allen will be giving us an update today on that effort. So Tom, I'm going to pass presenter power over to you to get us started. Just remember *6 to unmute when you're ready to start.
So this has been a daunting task to attempt to map salt marsh distribution across the entire region, but thanks with a lot of input and a really growing group of colleagues across the region, we're making pretty good progress. So the focus today is on this mapping effort, which is just a part of a larger effort, although the kind of central piece that also will look at the information as it informs sea level rise vulnerability of marshes and potentially other aspects of management. The purpose, of course, is to come up with techniques and really product-driven results that show distribution of salt marsh maps, of course, covering the regional extent of the LCC and sort of wall-to-wall marsh coverage to improve the thematic detail of maps. In particular, a focus has been to extend the detail in the wetland vegetative descriptive detail of salt marshes and to look at community types to the extent possible and to do that with completeness. So we'll be looking at classes that extend beyond the NWI coded classification, but that are still in sync with that and useful in other applications such as computer model simulations of salt marshes or habitat models and such. We also want the classes to be mutually exclusive, so as opposed to classes with modifiers, we want classes that are exclusive of each other and not overlapping and hierarchical.
Hey, Tom, I don't mean to interrupt. Is anyone else having trouble seeing your screen? I got a chat that someone else is. I can see it fine.
Let me double check on the...
If you're having trouble, if you're not seeing Tom's screen, could you speak up, *6 to unmute, or send me a note in the chat? I show up as Rua.
Yeah, it shows me as sharing.
Yeah, I can see you fine.
Okay. I'll listen out.
Okay. Sounds like no one else is having trouble.
Okay.
Okay,
yeah, so,
sorry, keep going.
Yep, just the related products, of course, there's NWI, and we are also interested in SLAM and other similar models, or either regional geospatial models or site models. Marsh equilibrium model of Jim Morris, who is also on this project, is one. that we would like our product to sync with. We also are aware of the various near habitat classifications and maps, so we are in sync with those, but also attempting to improve on the salt marsh thematic detail of those. The National Land Cover Data Set and Coastal Change Analysis products, which are Landsat-derived land cover maps. However, they also have limited thematic detail, so we essentially are, at this phase of the project, are focusing on salt marshes, even though we're using rather similar sets of data and analysis techniques. Let's see if I can screen. So there's just a screenshot of a couple of these products to give you some context as I show you some of their output that we'll have. That's North Inlet Winyah Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve, and that's one of their products is a marsh map classification that's very similar to what we'll produce, but we'll actually differentiate the Spartina classes in a little more detail. Here's a shot of NWI. Also at that near, it's actually the Baruch Marine Lab, and there's a comparison look at the CCAP product series. That's a 2001 Landsat. So you have a variety there that shows heads up and digitized field checked classes from NWI all the way down to pixel-based classification from CCAP and such, with some aggregation, some spatial smoothing going on to reduce the pixelation and noise as a result. So we have, as I mentioned last year, focused on Landsat 8 in the regional mapping, and why we've done that is to take advantage of new developments in the sensor, particularly the spectral resolution and radiometric resolution. By that I mean the addition of some new bands, which don't directly play a role in what we're doing, except that they are used to screen and remove cloud cover, and they're used to improve the spectral accuracy of the data in Landsat. The spatial resolution remains about the same. That's a limiting factor for certain applications, we're well aware. However, the radiometric resolution is an order of magnitude improved, so from 8 bits to 12 bits, and that really is a critical piece in our ability to differentiate and accurately map different classes of wetlands. In addition, not really a super factor for us, but there is greater temporal availability of marshes. And we're not mapping marshes at night, we're not using thermal imagery, so that's been less of a factor. The other thing is going forward or backward in time, we do have some historical continuity with the use of Landsat. So in terms of this as a project that could demonstrate future use and monitoring of marshes, we felt that this was really a strong asset, and also to be able to detect and quantify change on more of a biophysical level and not just a thematic class basis. Our approach really has makes some inroads in that. So here's a slide just showing an example of what you might have seen in the past. The top really 4 actually scenes are lower radiometric resolution. As you go toward the bottom, this is actually a Great Lakes example from NASA Goddard. It shows the higher fidelity and both spectral, tonal, hue, and contrast as you look at the different land cover types on land, in vegetation, and in the water when you get to 12-bit radiometric resolution. So that's the number of brightness levels that the sensor on Landsat detects. And it's 4,096 different brightness levels versus more recent Landsats 4 through 7 were 8-bit data, or 0 to 255 brightness levels. So we are collaborating, and we have myself and J.P. Walsh at ECU. We have a Coastal Studies Institute on the Outer Banks that we have as a focus of some of our work. We have Baruch Marine Lab in South Carolina, and both Skidaway Institutes in Sapelo and the LTER site in Georgia. So that's provided us a lot of the reference data that we're used to help direct training sites and basically begin the assessment of accuracy of our classification. One of the big challenges I mentioned last year was defining the classes that we could, in a parsimonious way and reliably map across the region. So we have to select Landsat scenes that are of the same season, of the same atmospheric or tidal conditions as a background, because that has such an important factor in the spectral response of intertidal wetlands. So as you go north to south, there's also a biogeographic gradient, and the marshes occupy different elevational zones relative to the tidal frame. And there's also actually different species abundances and different expressions in the structural response of those species to the the abiotic factors, particularly inundation, salt stress, and nutrient accumulation. So here's a set of slides that try to show this in a kind of schematic fashion, really broadly cut against no particular sites. This is more a conceptual diagram. In North Carolina, we have the Albemarle Pamlico Sound and some of the other coastal lagoons with enormous range and extent of juncus marshes. So we have relatively restricted extent of low marsh being broken up primarily into Spartina alterniflora, with the gradients there into patens and disticlus and a few other species. Broad swath as you move interior to the coast into more freshwater, and eventually you get into a really variable brackish zone. So these are the top tier classes that we're looking at where the brackets are. That's dominated by Spartina sinusoides and cladium in particular, and then a tidal fresh class where we have intermingling of Typha and Phragmites, and especially Phragmites in North Carolina. And then just a screenshot of some of the examples of this. You would typically find Spartina in proximity to our inlets, greater fresh or salt water, and then as you move into the wind tide dominated estuary, you would then see these enormous expanses of juncus, kind of shown here in the rust brownish red color. Large swaths of Phragmites in typically a fringing shoreline, colonial establishment, and then as you move into fresher water, you'll find the more brackish marsh. There's a screenshot of or a picture from the Coastal Studies Institute that I'll show you again, showing a rapidly eroding shoreline, and another one across the same sound with some Phragmites and very extensive along hundreds of meters of shoreline there. Moving into South Carolina, we find the same classes, but we find narrower spatial distribution, and we have a wider expanse of the low marsh. We actually have been able to pull apart a cover difference between Spartina alterniflora on marsh levees versus interiors. That grades into a patch of typically disticlus, patens, and interior flats begin to become expressed. Juncus tends to be a little more restricted in extent, oftentimes adjoining upland or geomorphic kind of barriers or landforms or development. We have a broader kind of river-dominated brackish zone. There you see also some surface mixing in a little more commonly than North Carolina, and a tidal fresh zone with intermingling again of Typha and Phragmites. There's a shot from the Baruch Institute showing the kind of upper zone of low marsh dominated by Spartina with deciduous and patens mixing in some spots. And then an aerial view from some colleagues working down there at Baruch and the Near, showing what Landsat struggles to see. This is a higher tide zone, so we also have a lot of water, but you'll see brighter greens around the more taller Spartina on the marsh kind of creek banks and levees. Then you'll see that grade into a little more salt-stressed, lower growth form of Spartina, but still low marsh. And then as you move up toward the uplands or up these marsh creeks, you'll finally enter a high marsh Juncus zone. Of course, we have a little bit of challenge doing this in 30-meter pixels, so small micro patterns are going to be a very difficult process to capture. And finally, Georgia, we have a broader expanse of the low marsh, and actually we've attempted to actually pull out short, medium, and tall Spartina. We have so far backed away from that, and we have still a Spartina-dominated low marsh, but we still are pulling out a medium, tall, and short form of that marsh. We have salt pans and a little wider expression, especially to the south. We have high marsh again with Juncus dominated. We have a wider brackish zone, and we still have a tidal fresh zone that we've added, kind of going beyond the really priority of our project. We wanted to capture that while we could and make sure we weren't excluding any potential brackish or high marshes. So we do extend our classification up into the rivers. One thing notable there is we do not have very much expression of Phragmites in that area. So this is just our collaborations down at Skidaway. We've had folks there, Mike Robinson and Clark Alexander in particular, helping us with reference data and field work. And there's a look at Groves Creek where some extremely fine-scale mapping has been done, and that has given us a great control and training for the Landsat classification. So a little bit of pixel talk here. Our methods, we've been documenting these such that they could be replicated in other LCCs or perhaps in the South Atlantic in the future from a monitoring kind of standpoint. We basically acquire cloud-free Landsat imagery from approximately the same time. Our scenes cover a 2-week period from 2014, where we had better calibration than the first year of Landsat. We do atmospheric correction. We do mosaicing of scenes that are taken along the same swaths. Then we mask out water using primarily near-infrared and a cluster analysis. We mask out uplands using elevation data and the National Land Cover data set. We then produce a set of composites. So rather than classifying all of the Landsat bands together, at least the multispectral bands, we are deriving 3 indices that have proven to be quite powerful in and of themselves for marsh mapping and classification. I call them the NDX composites. The Normalized Difference Water Index, Normalized Difference Vegetation Index, and the Normalized Difference Soil Index, which kind of captures soil, including rack and mud flats and salt flats and so forth. Our classification approach is really kind of 3 stages: segmentation of images into polygon vector objects. Then we train that. We choose, create a set of training polygons. Then we classify those, and our final result is a map, vector-based map of marshes. So our methodology has been to seek out the best available Landsat imagery, covering certainly the growing season for marshes, but also a narrow time span. So each one of these swaths or paths and row combinations of Landsat we've chosen for minimal cloud cover and for also ensuring that we had the same tidal conditions. So one note there is the South Carolina data were about 2 weeks later than the North Carolina and Georgia scenes, and the tide was about 1.5 foot lower, I think, than mean low water. This actually helped out some of the classification there, but it was a factor that we had some subtleties. We were not able to then mosaic the full region because all the Landsat scenes were not acquired on the same day and tide conditions. So we classified each pair of scenes that you can see here, two scene combinations, separately. But that did help us minimize kind of some limited edge effects and then bringing all these data back together. Pre-processing, again, more pixel talk, but if you're into remote sensing, we used NASA's Landsat calibration techniques. And then we also did our own atmospheric correction, basically shifting the histograms for each of the original data to 0, called dark object subtraction. Then we mosaicked the scenes, which was pretty effortless, and then the water masking and upland masking I mentioned earlier. The inputs to the classification. So these are the three approaches here. This is really inspired by two sets of remote sensing research, quite extensive. The one at the bottom is the Thomas transform. So this was developed early in the Landsat program as a way to detect changes in vegetation phenology. In particular, it was noted that agricultural crops would change their spectral reflectance through time, and if you transform the Landsat bands, you could actually predict a type of vegetation or agriculture and its trajectory spectrally through time. So we've actually adopted that approach here with the long-term goal of not just classifying the wetland classes now, but actually monitoring them for changes in the future. The graphic in the top right is a shot from Rogers and Kearney, 2003. They've done extensive work on marsh condition index and monitoring in the Chesapeake Bay on Louisiana. So they've created a set of composites that were used to actually then identify sub-pixel combinations or coverage of marshes, water, and soil or rack cover. So again, that's beyond the scope and goal of our project at this time, but we discovered that that combination was pretty effective for classification, and so we're using it in our image classification. Here's an example of one of these with after having done mostly water and inland upland cover type masking, we have a combination of bands in red, green, blue, the NDX bands. So red is the water index, blue or green is the NDVI, or vegetation health and vigor and cover index, and blue is the soil index, which kind of covers area, soil background, reflectance, and rack. So from this, you can look around the Baruch and Winyah Bay North Inlet near site. The pinkish colors and reddish colors really show the zones of Spartina. The greenish shows a really lush vegetation where you have the tidal fresh and sort of interior brackish marshes, and the bluish to purplish colors are really that juncus and background kind of mudflat mosaic. Here's a look side by side. Looks like my title side may not be easy to see the text. At the left is Landsat original bands in composite. At the right is the NDX composite. So we basically are summarizing the variance of about 5 spectral bands with 3 indices by using NDX. It's also, an effective data compression technique. The algorithm we adopted early on was just based on some recent work and success using object-oriented image analysis, which is a huge trend in this on ultra-fine resolution remote sensing. So we approached this on a polygon basis, and talking with several managers, and vegetative folks, we thought that this would also be inherently similar to a lot of their approaches to monitoring changes. We also get around the problems, some of the problems inherent with generalization and salt and pepper and noise and mixed pixels by taking an object-oriented approach. What that means is there's some advantages that we'll have. This is an example image of early work done on the Rachel Carson Reserve in North Carolina that used really fine scale resolution, 4-band color infrared NAPE imagery, LiDAR, elevation data, and synthetic aperture radar multi-date images. But it segments and tries to form homogeneous polygons of spectral or other input data characteristics. The great advantage of this is that you can then derive minimum mapping units that are a little finer scale but still coarser than the individual pixels. The classification, having then derived these objects, these vectors and polygons that we use, is a machine learning algorithm called support vector machines. It's proven very powerful and popular for object-oriented image classification. It's very fast. We're working on large volume of data and large numeric detail. We're using NDX and large floating point grids, and this algorithm is able to differentiate and then classify our wetland classes with a high degree of accuracy. So for that tool, we used a open source classification called Orfeo Toolbox. Part of that is a module called Monteverdi. This is free and open source available. We pulled this. A lot of the documentation was originally in French, and took a little bit of learning, as any open source software would have to generally include. But we use this to first segment the image. We used something called mean shift image segmentation to identify the polygons. The homogeneous spectral characteristics were maximized in the polygons. Then we clustered and identified training objects. Typically, each Landsat scene would have 30 to 40 polygons per class that we identified kind of as a ground truth accuracy. Then we would train the classifier. It would actually run a bit of a black box and produce output. So now some of the interesting maps. Again, these are coarse scale, and I'll show you some finer resolution examples. On the left is our NDX composite, and on the right is the derived classification. So this is the Georgia marshes, and you'll see a large swath of Spartina, the low, short, and the medium tall classes around the barrier islands and immediate kind of coastal breaks. You'll see interior into the rivers, more extensive areas of juncus. Then you'll finally grade into the tidal fresh and brackish zones. So we're attempting to now go back and look at the accuracy of this. We expect we will have some editing to do. The fortunate thing there is these are polygon objects, so they're much, much easier to edit and do any corrections than it would be to actually do that on a pixel basis. Recently, we've been discussing some of this on another project led by Christine Hladik, Georgia Southern, and working for the Georgia state government. She's produced a higher resolution, 4-meter resolution, pixel-based product, and with extensive amount of ground truth, we see a lot of compatibility on that with our project. So we anticipate working with her and colleagues to verify the accuracy of our coarser scale classification. South Carolina, just another look, panning around. This is the NDX composites. You can almost use the color in these composites as an indicator of the marshes themselves, which is kind of a proof qualitatively to the value of it for classification. When you look at a classification of that, here's Charleston in the center of this particular shot. Again, we see extensive salt marshes in the back barrier estuarine environment and moving up into the rivers through a large juncus zone and eventually into a tidal fresh area. In South Carolina, you also do encounter a little larger extent of Phragmites, especially up toward Baruch and the North Inlet area near Georgetown. And we also began to encounter, as with Georgia, a little more extent of salt and mudflats. We have that very rarely, scarcely in North Carolina. So zooming in a little closer, on the left is a pixel-based classification that was done just for comparative purposes for the Charleston area. And on the right, it is a zoom in just to the east of Charleston of the NDX composites. Then I have a zoom in of the same pixel-based image classification with those classes. And then this is just a zoomed in view of our derived polygon-based classification. I do think one of these polygons is a little suspect there, that there's a lot of water pixels mixed into that, so that might be an example of some of the editing that we need to undertake. And there is NWI classification, just showing that there's far less thematic specificity. For North Carolina, we've broken out the state into about 5 different zones, and we're classifying each of those. So here is Cape Fear on the left, and the Currituck Banks, northern Outer Banks area. So there you have extensive brackish and high marshes. In the Cape Fear area, you have salt marshes grading up the Cape Fear into extensive brackish marshes. And interestingly, in the large estuarine system, Albemarle Pamlico, we did find, as expected, large swaths of also brackish and juncus marshes. We do have a little bit of issues. We might be concerned about Cedar Island, where some aspects of that marsh appear to be in a kind of a diminishing state relative to sea level rise, and they're accumulating enormous swaths of wrack deposition. The wrack, however, is mostly juncus marsh itself, so wrack actually caused us some problems, but because it was so extensive on the marshes there, and there were some burns and some other things that were a little bit confounding, but we anticipate zooming through a few of those refuges where that type of management is taking place, just to verify that we didn't misclassify something because there was some other action done on the marsh. On the right is the outer Pamlico Albemarle Peninsula, and you'll see the Alligator River, extremely fresh water. There is a bit of salt water that comes in there to the south from the Intracoastal Waterway. Nonetheless, we have extensive tidal fresh marshes, and we've also been considering breaking out a separate class to denote swamp forest, but so far we've not had too much problem with that, and we had masked out a lot of that based on elevation in any case. A zoom in on the outer banks, southern outer banks, the core banks towards Cape Lookout. Again, to give you a finer resolution comparison, NWI here showing emergent salt marsh, E2EM, and also some shrub scrub in the upper back barrier areas. The NDX composites, showing the high degree of this purplish reddish color, indicative of Spartina. And then you have the bluish colors indicative of a little higher marsh like Juncus, and the greenish indicating some other lush vegetation. I wish I'd put a legend on this one, but again, that's a largely Spartina-dominated area. Note that we've masked out water, and just offshore you actually see seagrasses here. So a perfect opportunity for someone to come along and use Landsat for seagrass mapping. In this place it could actually work. So these preliminary results, I've glossed through a lot of the significant pre-processing and the image processing that went into that, but that will all be pretty tightly documented in our report later this year. The training objects, of course, have high accuracy. We aim for 100% accuracy and the polygons that we use to train the classifier. The limitations that we have, and we're still working through a little bit, are the Spartina classes. So we break out two classes of low marsh with Spartina, and the problem is that still keeps our accuracy down into the 80s and 90% kind of range. If we just had one low marsh class, that would bump that back up dramatically. Well, the other issue that we might have is sort of gradational between a mixed brackish marsh and other tidal fresh marshes. In places like South Carolina in particular, and toward Georgia, you have a much more extensive area of former rice paddy areas and extremely mixed marshes. So we still are hoping to actually keep those classes separate. But when we do our accuracy assessment, that will kind of tell the tale. It'd be important to hear from management on the significance of separating those. We had hoped also to extensively map Phragmites. It's been quite a dynamic class, and it's really limited extent except for North Carolina. So we have not so far pulled out a separate Phragmites class that could be doable in a separate phase. We also have some dynamic shorelines where in the process of mapping and training, we actually discovered hundreds of meters of erosion on some of our marshes. So we actually, even in just a year or two, have been mapping marshes that no longer exist because they have been eroded by nor'easters and parts of the Pamlico Sound in particular. It could be some of these elsewhere, so hence the importance of timeliness and a concurrency and having a method that can be replicated in the future. And I've mentioned some of the other factors already. This is an example of the challenge of spatial scale, that Landsat has very little hope of trying to differentiate this particular type of zonation. This is the Waccamaw River down near the Baruch Marine Lab and Georgetown. And this is a shot showing an example of one area of rapidly eroding shoreline. Now this is 100 meters from an old grayscale orthophoto all the way to today. That's 100 meters of erosion, averaging 5 meters a year. We actually uncovered a couple areas of this near Alligator River Refuge in North Carolina where there was 100 meters of erosion in 3 years. Yeah. So what this is leading to, and kind of the ongoing and next phase soon here, is taking the resulting maps of marshes and then interrelating them with marsh elevations. So these are graphics from Jim Morris and staff at Baruch Lab at South Carolina, showing the elevation distribution of marshes relative to the tide frame, with those that are leaning toward mean high water or lower being more vulnerable to sea level rise and keeping up with it. So what we anticipate very soon is being able to map the elevation distributions by each marsh and then overlay. What our classification will hopefully allow us to do is to distinguish those zones, and there will be overlaps in them, based on these histograms or hypsographs, but we'll actually be able to look marsh by marsh, polygon by polygon, to see the relative vulnerability based on elevation. That is not a trivial undertaking, so Christine Hladik and other people have begun working intensively on correcting LiDAR data in marshes for this exact purpose. So we are interested in pursuing a collaboration where we could use the marsh mapping and LiDAR to actually make improved digital elevation models that would both improve this hypsometric elevation analysis, but it would also potentially greatly improve simulation models of wetland response, like SLAM. At the site scale, Christine and others are doing an intensive amount of field data collection for capturing what are the elevations of different marsh types. And we have been doing that as well as monitoring the actual accretion on marshes. This is a shot from work by J.P. Walsh in North Carolina. That's on Roanoke Island, crossing a small fringe of Spartina as it grades up into a Juncus marsh. We've been tabulating the shoreline change using a couple of other tools, and as part of our project, we are producing an assimilated database of the rates of shoreline erosion and marsh accretion across all of these regions, focusing in on the nears and sites where there is already pretty solid existing data, such as the Georgia Altair, Baruch, and here at CSI in North Carolina. What we are uncovering is certainly not great surprise, but that fetch, among other things, is an important control on the rate of shoreline change on marshes, as is the type of marsh, and that there is a process of cannibalization occurring. So we've discovered patterns of the rate of deposition increases where you have a marsh that's rapidly eroding. A lot of that material, both sediment and organic material, is immediately deposited behind the eroding edge on the marsh. That's a process that is actually being tabulated and would be a great variable for including and updating, sort of regionalizing SLAM and other models in the future. So these are some maps that we anticipate coming out for each of those kind of focus areas. That's a marsh accretion map. Future directions that we intend to pursue. I showed the one quick map that Christine Hladik had done for Georgia, and we had an interest in pursuing something like that with finer resolution data for the smaller areas of our project, and we still aim to do that using color infrared orthophotos, at LiDAR data in particular. Those will be relatively restricted to some of these near sites that we're working. We really think there would be great interest in the process of doing that, also undertaking some LiDAR elevation correction. So that's more of a spin-off. Another product of our maps will be not just the classes, but the actual NDX composites. And so we anticipate being able to provide those digitally and to use those in the future for change detection on marshes. And they may become interesting in research as potential indicators, for example, marsh dieback or marsh migration indicators. Some of the emergent dynamics, I think Phragmites is becoming a little bit difficult for us because of its ephemeral nature and also the active management that's ongoing on that. So we may only be able to derive that accurately for a few areas. The other issues that we would like to see in the future are, this cannibalization data. When that is released with our report, we'll have data on that for each of the areas. Looking at salinity and patterns there, it's a great related one. And I think this sort of idea of broader biogeographic shifts to the north as these types of marsh distribution products could become a periodic but operational type of use for LCCs in the states. So with that, I really would like to encourage some of you on the call to reach out to me and others on the project for input. We anticipate putting up draft, full, extensive versions of these maps and providing a web-based tool for input on them. Certainly if we have error, we would like to be able to edit and correct for that. So I will work with the LCC to try to release those for let's call it draft or comment. The more input we have, the better. And then at the end of the report, by next summer, I would expect we'd have a final product released. With that, I think I should stop and save some time for questions.
Sounds great, Tom. Thanks so much for that great presentation.
Okay.
And it sounds like, yeah, there'd be a lot of opportunities for folks to weigh in. We could maybe get you on the South Atlantic website, write a blog, link to your draft data, and help you have a good mechanism to get comments and review.
Mute off.
Questions? Just remember to press *6 to unmute, or you can type your questions directly into the chat box.
Hi, Tom. This is Amy Keister. I was wondering, do you have an idea of when the draft data will be up so people can plan to review it?
If you muted yourself again, Tom, you'll have to *6 again.
Yeah, I would expect by about January, because what I'd like to do is be able to put up a little tool that would allow people also to add input on it and comment. Something less than like true crowdsourcing this, but something more than dumping draft data up there. So what I intend to do is put it on an ArcGIS Online layer, like a web map service or a web feature service that people could bring into their own browsers or their own ArcGIS desktop if they wanted, and review it and compare it. If anybody is interested in rolling up their sleeves and a little more detail on that, I could also work with them to give them some commenting, editing capability in that process.
That sounds great. We can also work with you to use our platform, the Conservation Planning Atlas, which is similar to ArcGIS Online.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you.
Awesome. So great opportunity coming up in January. Anybody else? Let's see. I've got a chat. Great work. I can see a lot of utility for regulatory purposes. Have you tackled oyster mapping too?
Well, oysters, seagrass. I mentioned the Phragmites. Those would be great. But no, haven't done the oyster mapping. There are others I'm aware in North Carolina doing that. There is another project I have on salinity mapping. If someone there is interested in contacting me, I am trying to assimilate some of that. Essentially, what I've been discovering and what LCC is actually so good about is a need for interoperability of data across the states. And so in North Carolina, we have a few groups that are mapping oyster beds, a few groups that are mapping salinity, and even those data cannot be commingled and integrated. So from a GIS standpoint, it would be great if we had a template or a data model that then people across different geographic areas could actually adopt, and then the data could come together and be that much more seamless and potentially useful.
Great, thanks. Any other questions? All right, well, hearing none, I'll take back the presenter power here, and we'll just wrap up with some updates from the staff of your cooperative.
And thanks, everybody, for attending this morning.
Thanks, Tom. All right, so share again. All right, so a few updates. First, I just wanted to mention that we have the Winter Web Forum schedule available, the next 3 months of talks lined up. So you can see what you have to look forward to in 2016. So as always, I'll continue to put the Web Forum on the South Atlantic LCC event calendar and continue to send out the monthly reminder email. One of our cooperative members actually emailed me with a suggestion to do this flyer so that folks could see the topics further ahead of time. So definitely feel free to shoot me an email or give me a call if you ever have feedback on what I or any of the rest of the staff can do better to spread the word and make this event interesting and relevant. Amy Keister is going to give us an update on freshwater aquatic indicator revisions. Amy?
Yeah, thanks, Hillary. So we are in the middle of revising our freshwater aquatic indicators that will be used in Blueprint 2.1. So this is one of the systems that we knew we wanted to update quickly after we released Blueprint 2. So we're going to have a call to review those indicators next Monday at 1 o'clock. And the suggested revisions are up online on our Conservation Planning Atlas. And so I encourage you all, if you're interested in helping us refine our freshwater indicators, please shoot me an email, and I'll make sure that you get links to all of the proposed revisions and have a link to the webinar so that you can call in and help us do a better job of modeling this system. A couple of the exciting things that we're doing, we've able to really improve our indicator that measures natural areas and riparian buffers through use of some data from the Southeast CCAP, Southeast Connectivity Assessment Program. And we're using a lot of data from that project to improve things like resident fish connectivity, diadromous fish connectivity, and we'll be able to improve our impervious surface layer. So we're excited about these improvements and could really use your help in making sure we do a good job with this. So shoot me an email, and I'll get you all linked up. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Amy. And last but certainly not least, I am really excited to announce that we have Mallory Martin with us today. He's our new coordinator. Mallory, his first day was actually Monday, but today's the first day he's been physically in the office since he really hit the ground running by going straight to a meeting of the Southeast Partnership for Planning and Sustainability, or SURPASS. So I was going to give Mallory a chance to introduce himself. I don't think he's on the line. I think he's wrestling with some admin and tech stuff here on his first day, but
I am on the line.
You
Hillary.
are here. Yay.
Yes.
All right. Well, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself to the folks on the line?
Sure. So, again, this is Mallory Martin. I'm starting this week as the coordinator for the South Atlantic LCC, and as part of the staff, I'm new in that role, just beginning this week. But I'm not new to LCCs and to the South Atlantic. Having served as steering committee chair and having served really as part of the stand-up group initially about 5 years ago, starting the LCC. So I'm very excited to be part of the staff and looking forward to continuing to shape conservation outcomes throughout the geography. Looking forward to working with everyone through the partnership. I'm not sure who's on the call. I'm actually I can't see anything. I'm just working the audio remotely, and waiting to get through the process so that I can get email and get telephone and be able to communicate with each of you. But until that happens, please work through the rest of the staff, and hopefully we'll connect very soon in the future and continue to move the conservation needle. So thanks for that acknowledgement, and look forward to continuing to work with everybody. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us, Mallory. So the last thing I just want to preview the next Third Thursday Web Forum. We're actually canceling the December webinar since it's getting pretty close to the holidays. So the next one will be taking place January 21st. As always, same time, same place, right here at 10 a.m. We'll be hearing from Joshua Epstein, who's a graduate research assistant at the University of Florida. And he'll be talking about the functional diversity of fish communities in the South Atlantic geography. As you may know, functional diversity represents the diversity of traits in a system, and so it's really important to influence many aspects of ecosystem functioning. So Josh and his team have taken a trait-based approach to test the success of some of the South Atlantic's ecosystem indicators, measuring freshwater fish trophic, reproductive, and habitat functional diversity across the South Atlantic region at the Huck 8 scale. So they've related those functional diversity values to some of the indicators and other environmental variables to determine how effectively functional diversity could be used to predict those watershed or landscape characteristics. So that should be a very interesting talk, continuing to work on testing and validating the indicators to make sure they're capturing the most important aspects of healthy functional systems and laying a strong foundation for the blueprint. So finally, I always want to make sure folks know how they can get involved in the cooperative. So in addition to contacting your staff or someone else involved in the cooperative directly, we always post frequent updates and events on the website. You can go there to learn about upcoming projects, opportunity to serve on teams, or access spatial data in the blueprint. So So I'd really encourage you, if you haven't already, to join our web community to get access to our monthly newsletter and a reminder about this web forum. So with that, I'll open the floor for any additional questions folks might have before we sign off. Just remember *6 to unmute. All right, hearing none, that's it from the staff of your cooperative. So thanks again, Dr. Allen, for presenting, and glad you all could join us today. Hope to see you in January.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Tom.